Hey, I Can Do Anything podcast listeners. Today we have a special treat. We have Rob Oyler with us. He will hopefully have water with him because I will be asking him a ton of questions. And unfortunately, Ashley is not able to join us today. Welcome to the podcast, Rob.
Thank you, Robin. How are you today?
I'm doing all right.
I understand it's your birthday today.
It is my birthday today. Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I love my birthday. I am 53 today. I do not worry about numbers. I could care less about the number. It's all within me and the spirit and vitality and my zest for life. So I don't care about numbers.
You shouldn't. That's great. You look great. You look like you're 30.
Thank you. But as a business owner, you probably do care about numbers.
We do. Yes. Yes, ma'am. We very much do.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and in your business and how you got started.
Okay. Boy, that takes me way back. My business today, I'm in the broadband business. I've been in telecom/broadband my entire career. How I got into the business, it's a bit of a long story. I started out, oh gosh, just as this punk kid, call it 12, 13, the neighborhood that I lived in. Back in those days, you would just go explore and your parents wouldn't care where you were until dinner time, right? But I would go exploring further and further each day, and we had this park in between our neighborhood and this retail environment. So I went up to these stores on occasion and ran into this car stereo store one day. And the day I happened to go there for the first time, they had this Lamborghini out in the driveway. And Alpine stereos were in Lamborghinis at the time, and I was just amazed. Cannonball Run back in the 80s, if you recall that movie. It just all came together for a 13-year-old, and my eyes lit up. And long story short, I kept revisiting that location and got to be kind of buddies, if you will, with some of the workers there. And I don't know if you can call it taking me under their wing, but I was kind of the hanger-on that hung around the store. And by the time I could afford my first car, which I think was around 15 or 16, I wanted to put a car stereo in it and did what I could. I had these 6x9s in the back deck and stuck there with Velcro. And I think if I would have gotten in a bad accident, they probably would have come forward and decapitated me. But from there, I just kept adding to the car stereo system over a couple of years and getting better and better. Entered car stereo contests and started winning and just kept going from there. But that gave me the foundation of knowing my way around cars. And that's important because in installing these car stereo systems, you're going into power and the circuit breakers or what am I trying to talk about? The
Fuses?
Yeah, the fuses. There you go. Thank you. I was thinking circuit breakers. I was talking to somebody previously about circuit breakers, so I was stuck on that word. But yeah, so the fuses, you're wiring your phone system with the car factory system. So you need to know your way around there. And then from that, I entered the Army at 17. I needed my parents' permission because I wasn't 18 yet. So I went on what's called split training, and this will all make sense in a second. But after my junior year in high school, I went to basic training in Louisiana and came back with a lot of discipline and better attitude about life. But I joined it just kind of as a, hey, let's try this out as a goal, right? And when I came back from that summer, I worked at a place called Rushoff. It was a locksmith business primarily, right? But they also did roughed in central vac systems and home alarms. And so I started doing that and was doing new construction for about 2 weeks when the owner became the first Southwestern Bell mobile phone agent in my hometown. And as a part of that, they needed somebody that knew their way around cars. And they knew that, I was into car stereo contests and so on. So I took that job reluctantly because I love being out in new construction. But I did that. I worked there for about a year, and then Verizon, which at the time was Cellular One, came to town as a competitor to Southwestern Bell. They recruited me over. I did that for several years. And in doing that, these owners would come in with brand new, cars, Mercedes, whatnot. And the sales rep, back then you had sales reps, you'd walk in, or there'd be a direct sales rep coming to a business trying to sell phones. Now it's just a commodity. You can go anywhere. But back in the day, you were selling those 3-watt systems that were installed or hard installed into your car, or you'd have a bag phone. And so the salespeople would bring the customer back to me, a little old me, because they wanted to see the punk kid in the back that was going to rip up their car, right? And so I would be the one that ended up giving them the confidence and walking through what I was going to do, that I ended up helping close the deal for these sales guys that are driving nicer cars than I was. So I knew quickly that I needed to get in on the sales side. So I did that. I did inside sales, outside sales, direct sales. And then how this also ties together, when I was doing these car stereo contests, the nationals for 2 years in a row were in Tempe, Arizona. So we went down there, never having been there before for this contest, fell in love with the place. And after I graduated college, I had been in wireless and sales and everything, knew everything there was about the wireless side of the business. So interviewed, had never lived away from home other than, the Army and so on, but always wanted to move away. So I moved to Tempe, Arizona. My wife and I, as soon as we got married, we moved there, not knowing anyone. And we had a couple of opportunities in Kansas City. I'm from Lawrence originally. And we figured the opportunities that we had, there were 3. Tempe was probably in 3rd place, but what made the deciding factor for us was we said, if we don't do it, and we always look back through our life and say, what if, we're going to have that regret. But if we go down and we fail miserably, we can at least come back without any regrets. So that's what we did. That's what made the decision. And from there, I succeeded and was hitting all the sales awards with a company called, it was Macaw Communications originally, and Macaw got bought out by AT&T. So AT&T was down in the Phoenix area, worked for them. And one day the internet came along. You kept hearing the pros of the internet. And I was like, what's this? And got into it and said, gosh, I know everything there is to know about wireless. I've got to know something there, about fiber. And so I quit. I took another job, and I came back from lunch the first day and almost quit that job because I figured I had ruined my life. And this is like Chinese. I thought I would know it, and I don't know anything. So as my wife likes to say, I went to a bookstore. I think it was a Books A Million store, and bought 3 books on fiber networks and did a crash course. And of course, on the wireless network, like an AT&T or Verizon, 98% of that network's fiber based. So I knew enough to be dangerous. And anyway, kept going from there. Fast forward to today.
I'm gonna stop you really quick.
Go ahead.
So, really interesting question for you. What made you, if you were about ready to quit, what made you, in discussing with your wife, what gave you the inner strength to go out and do research? How did you make that decision? Because you could have just quit.
Yeah, I could have. I've always had pretty good discipline. The Army obviously was very foundational to me as well. But I think I've always had the drive. I guess, certain things in life bring out qualities that you don't think you had. I would say from those points, I would have been motivated anyway. But I had just had our first daughter. And, a lot of folks, when they first have their kids, it makes them or breaks them in a sense that you freak out, right? And our goal was for her to stay at home. And looking back, we were able to do that 6 months into her being born. My wife has stayed home since then. Big sacrifice. But when you look at this baby, especially your first kid, and they're 100% dependent on you, you either freak out and run for the hills, and there's many divorces from that. In fact, I've got an ex-brother-in-law is kind of that scenario, or it motivates you, right? It scares you so much that you step up and it motivates you. So she was, my daughter was my motivation. That if I had any doubts, that solidified it. That if my wife's going to stay at home, we've got this new baby. I just changed careers. I either go back and continue to do what I was doing, or I go forward here. The irony is I was doing so well on the wireless side The commissions were phenomenal. But I had developed so many corporate accounts at that point that I turned into an order taker. So it sounds odd, but the passion of selling, you do get a high when you close a deal. And when you're selling cell phones, you get that potentially multiple times a day. So that's really what my core drive is. I love that high of educating someone and closing a deal, right? And so when I had those deals, the advantage was I had these great accounts, but every day I'd wake up, and this was back when the fax machines were sending orders over. I'd wake up and have 10, 12 orders, and I'd have to go to the warehouse to get those phones, program them, set them up, and go deliver them. And I wasn't really interfacing with those customers because it was the corporate account umbrella that I had sold, and now their employees were taking advantage of it. So I was like, this is great, but I'm just a glorified order taker. And so that's really what motivated me to make a change. I just didn't settle in that role.
I don't know much about your career besides reading up on you through the different web pages, but you definitely have a mindset. And that's one of the questions I've been thinking about reading through online pages of, why did Rob keep going? How did he become so successful? What was the mindset? So I had to ask. So we can keep going. And thank you for your service, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So the mindset, I don't know. My wife gives me heck because I'm not happy unless I have 10 balls in the air at the same time. And I know the disadvantage of that, the gray hair and the stress and so on that comes along with that. But I truly have to be busy thinking about things. I'm always brainstorming something. So I think you're wired a little bit like that, but I think everybody has an entrepreneurial spirit inside of them. It's just different ways that they tap into that, and either their family dynamics or history either motivates them to act on an idea or not. Everyone has an idea and shares that idea with friends and family, and folks are like, oh, hey, that sounds great. But then it stops there. They're like, what's for dinner, right? So it certainly takes someone that can jump off the cliff, so to speak, and make ideas successful or businesses successful. So I think I embrace that fear, but at the same time, it does scare the heck out of folks. You can't just risk the whole family financial situation. So in anything I do and have done, I've always thought, how can I have either a side gig, or how can I have this baseline income to where, things will be tight, but, I can make a run at this and give myself a runway. And, at the end of that runway, reassess and see if you want to keep going or not. So I think I don't think I have any superpowers above the average individual. I just I think over time, and I hate to keep bringing this up, but foundationally, in the Army, you go through basic training, and anyone can have the same experience but they beat you up and tear you down and tell you how much of a horrible individual you are, and then they build you back up. And having gone through that experience, there's you kind of ask yourself, well, hey, I know that I can pretty much do anything now, right? Because I went through that experience, and that doesn't really hold a candle to other folks' traumatic life experiences or anything like that. But I think that really gave me the confidence. And I would say, no matter what you do, sports, business, anything in life, 80% of it's mental. Golf is the same way, right? So you can have that skill, but if you have the attitude and the confidence, then that goes a long way. So I'd say that's what's helped me the most throughout my career.
I would agree. Let's go back to those early days where
Sure.
you were telling your story, and then I interrupted with my mindset question.
Oh, no. So I ended up staying with the broadband company, and I worked for them in Phoenix for a good year and really got the foundation. And there was a gentleman that I used to work with at Verizon/Cell One back in Kansas City before I moved to Arizona. He went on to be quite successful, and he joined a broadband company. And I had seen a promotion for him in the news and just congratulated him. and he heard that I had a new baby and was joking and said, "Hey, when are you going to come back to Kansas?" Right. And so I stayed in touch with him and ended up later on reaching back out to him. I had a question about something, and we talked more about it. And he basically said, "Hey, we've got a position that we're trying to fill. You'd fit the role perfectly for it." It was in Madison, Wisconsin. I accepted the job, moved the family to Madison, had a heck of a time. We loved the city, and it was a telecom provider. There was a fiber ring that we built in town, and put a switch on it and started selling to businesses. And that company, I was with that company for 7 years. And then that was the early 2000s. If you'll recall the telecom bust, we were one of those. In fact, funny story. I say we sold and closed the doors a pregnancy too early, because about 9 months later things turned, and who we ended up selling to sold us for 3 times what we sold it to them for. And in selling that company, there were some assets that I had sold to Sprint in Chicago, and it had never really been done before. Sprint was going out and getting their own circuits, but they were rushing to market at the time, and spending money like crazy with these circuits with AT&T and so on, the fiber circuits, that is, and then they put their wireless on the ends of those. And I had successfully sold some dark fiber networks in Chicago for Sprint, and the new buyer of our company was not interested in those assets, because Madison was like 34 other markets we were in, which were all considered what's known as tier 3 markets. And the idea was, if we were successful there, the big players would come down to the tier 3 markets and buy us out. And like I said, we were pregnancy too early in getting out of that business. But I sold those assets to a company here in Kansas City that built fiber networks for school districts.
So you were the owner of that company at that point?
I was not the owner of that company. And that company, I'm not sure if you want me to say names of companies or keep those out, but
Doesn't matter.
yeah, so the name of that company was Unite Private Networks. And I was with them for 7 years. And the joke there is I was a pregnancy late to that party, because there was 4 gentlemen that started the company. I came along about 8 months later, and then at that 9th month I joined. I was the largest non-funding equitable shareholder in the company, and it was a brand new company. We took off and went gangbusters, got up to 21 states that we were in, selling school districts. And
what does that mean, selling school districts?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So
that's okay. I'll keep asking questions.
Yeah. We build wide area networks. So what that is, when you lay fiber, you have 2 options throughout the US on any telecommunication services. So historically, that's the cable and telephone company. And, the old copper plant that was in existence for decades got upgraded to cable hybrids, then fiber hybrids. And now they're, for the most part, 100% fiber based. And so those public networks, the incumbents, cable and telephone companies, those are a system that have been in place so long that they just keep adding to that. So if you think of a plumbing system in your house, you keep adding shower heads. If everybody's taking a shower at the same time, what happens, right? There's not a lot of pressure. So there's watered down services. And during COVID, we all experienced that. And so what we do, or did at Unite, and I do today, is we build these private networks. And for school districts, and I'll go into some of the strategy here in a minute, but when we build a fiber network from scratch, we do them point to point. So if you have 10 sites throughout town, it could be hospitals, it could be banks, it could be school districts. We build dedicated fiber in between those points. And so none of those sites share any of the fiber. So it's like putting a dedicated water pipe to your shower head, and you could have 50 people taking a shower at the same time, and your pressure wouldn't go down, in theory, right? So that was the business proposition. The reason we focused on school districts was twofold. One, there's a lot of federal funding at work that the schools can get reimbursement for any tech spend. It's called an E-rate program, which is based on free or reduced lunches that kids are getting at school. And so additionally, when we build a school district, if you think about a city, how do you reach every corner of a city in the best way, right? There, you could go to hospitals, you could go to libraries. Libraries is probably 1, 2, or 3, but those are long distances. Nothing hits every corner of a town better in the U.S. than a school district. So if I sell a school district a fiber network, when I'm building it, I overbuild it. So if I have a hole in the ground to lay some fiber, or I have a guy climbing a pole, if the school only needs, say, 50 fibers, the incremental cost from 50 to 2,000 is just the price of the fiber. The engineering, permitting, and construction are all the same, right? It's kind of like painting your house. If you're going to paint it, 98% of the cost of painting your house is the guy that paints it. So why not go with the best paint? Instead of the $30 a gallon, go with $120 a gallon. Now you don't have to paint your house for 20 years. So the same theory applies here. And so we pass everybody else when we build that school district. And I can then go and sell. Think about, I tell my mom, she doesn't know what the hell I do. So I say, Mom, I plant apple trees, right? And so these apple trees are these individual school districts. In my current company, that I'll tell you more about in a minute, we're in 23 states. So we've got networks all over the place. We've sold 250 of these things. And so these apple trees, once you've planted that tree, you get a nice customer, nice revenue. But then when you pick the apples, those are your commercial customers, your wholesale customers, your residential customers, and so on. So you can do that because you've passed by all of those when you built the school district. So it's kind of a Trojan horse in a way to get into each market. And so that's what I did when I joined Unite. We blew that place up. We had a private equity transaction in 2009, going into 2010, right around the crash. So it didn't affect us, thankfully. And I had a 2-year contract there. I stayed on a year, got in a bit of a pissing match with the CEO. We're friends today, but we were always very honest with one another, which you need to be, by the way, right? You can't beat around the bushes. And we just had a fundamental disagreement on a couple of pieces of strategy. And I resigned. I had a year non-compete. So I sat on the sidelines for a year, contemplating my next steps. And I always knew I wanted to do my own thing. I just lacked capital, excess capital, because when you build these networks, they're cost prohibitive. I mean, it takes just boatloads of capital to build these. Very expensive. You're going through rights of way. You got to avoid sewers, gas lines, all kinds of things, and then just the sheer mileage that you're building. So I was ready to roll, and someone said, or a few people said, "Hey, there's this Kaufman Fast Track program here in Kansas City." I don't know how much you know about Marion Kaufman, but he started a pharmaceutical company in Kansas City years ago. That was bought out. He did very well. He was the owner of the Royals, and his legacy continues to this day. And he's got worldwide notoriety for his entrepreneur programs, and they're based here in Kansas City. So I resisted it. I'm like, I don't want to take a step back. Here I am. I know all of the answers, right? So I'm thankful that I did. I ended up taking this program, and I was still awaiting my non-compete. I'd say I was 7 months into it, and took this fast track program, and it was great. It was a lot of the stuff that I kind of knew or had heard before, but I would equate it. Now, I don't have my MBA, but I would equate it to an MBA program in that there's a lot of group think, a lot of group discussion, a lot of outside experts coming in and speaking to you. And so I developed a great network, greater than I had. And I learned a whole bunch along the way, some real intangibles. But at the end, they had a presentation. And so all of the students, you would have to present to this panel. And they brought in this panel under the guise of, hey, these guys might be interested in investing in you. And I thought, yeah, whatever. That's just them getting us excited. And gosh, I think there was a banker, a PE guy, an attorney, a couple of folks with the foundation, and so on. So we presented. I ended up winning that presentation for my idea, which was this company. And thank you. And I had 3 offers, actually, legitimate offers. One was from someone on the panel, and 2 were from introductions of other panel members. And I ended up partnering with my original partner as a result of the attorney that was on that panel introducing us. So this gentleman I partnered with, he had just sold a data center business, which is very capital intensive as well. And why that was important was that the banking relationships are key, especially in what we do, because you need so much capital. You have to start with a small bank, but you quickly outgrow them, and then so of course they want to lead and stay in as a syndicate of any future deals, and so they'll introduce you to bigger banks and so on. So that's always the constant. I would say 30% of my time was having banker presentations, and they always loved us eventually once the light bulb went off, right? The proverbial light bulb. But they needed to understand the business, and we had great banking relationships. But this individual that I partnered with, he had an existing local relationship, and we hit the ground running from that perspective. So we had enough capital between the two of us to self-fund that first year. But the bank said, "Hey, I know you guys have it, but let's run this through the system this first year, just so we get used to the processes and so on." So it was off to the races from there. Business school, and I'm a business management and finance major, and from that, you learn a lot in school, and there's certain ways they teach you things that just don't meet reality in the real world. And as a way of giving back, I speak to business classes at a high school here locally once a semester. I haven't done it in the last year because of some of the COVID restrictions, but some of the things I teach them is that very point, that what you learn, have an open mind, have a critical thinking mindset, but the foundational items are what you want to hold on to, right? You need to be prepared to block and tackle and edit in the future. But just one example I might give is, they teach you in business school, if you have a contract, you can get funding from any bank. You just take that contract to the bank, and you see it on Shark Tank too. How many orders do you have, right? And but what banks really care about is the cash flow. When are they going to get the cash, right? And so what we do, I mentioned how capital intensive it is. You got to make this build. You got to execute on that, and those take 1 year to 2 years. We had one take 3 years to build because it was just such a large and complex project that you don't start receiving funding, revenues from that customer or funding from the federal government as part of their program until they've accepted the network. Or, if you have 100 sites you're building to, maybe you've connected to 20, you can get them to slowly accept those 20. So you have revenue starting, but you've got this big gap, right? So I sell this deal, which could take me 6 months to 1 year to close. Then it takes me 6 months to 3 years to build. And then I get revenues on the back end of that. So there's all kinds of funding, questions and challenges along the way. So, those are a lot of the stressors.
How did you learn that? Was it trial by error? Did you have mentors? Did you?
I'd say all of the above. There's, enough to be dangerous. I always say, fake it till you make it, right? That I tell my team here, I tell my family that, but I also tell my kids as they were growing up, tell me how you failed today, right? Because I want you failing. If you fail, you're going to learn from that. So it's just knowing enough to go in and talk about it. And they're always going to, every bank is different. So they're going to throw a new curve to you. And you're like, well, how do I figure that out? And a lot of folks say, well, gosh, you do these complex builds and there's permits, and we built on tribal lands and military installations and some real complex stuff. And I get that common question when I speak to the high schools. Well, gosh, how do you do this? How do you get into it? How would you know to do that? And I'm like, you know what? I pick up the phone and I call who's in charge of that permit. And I say, ma'am, here's what I'm doing. What steps do I need to take? And they love to talk about themselves. You call them by name. You're polite and professional with them, and they want to talk. They want to tell you, right? And so it's no magic secret sauce. It's just having a conversation. You certainly need to be a people person. You can't be an introvert and be successful in those dynamics. But that's where a lot of it came from, is just knowing enough to start the conversation and finding the answers along the way. You're right about the water, by the way.
Yeah, I told you. Yeah, that's great. A lot of this podcast, I don't know if you've listened to a few of the episodes, but we're always looking at what were the barriers or what held you back, and how did you know to break through them, or what gave you the motivation to break through them? Was it your internal drive, or people call it grit? Was it your external influences? Was it a combination of everything? So you did a great job of explaining it, because it is what this podcast is about. How do you get over those hurdles? And are you always going to take no for an answer, or are you going to continue to drive and find ways to make it happen?
Yeah, exactly. There's so many things that brings to mind. Growing up, I was what's called a whoopsie baby, if you will. My mom was 17, my dad was 18, and they got married just because they had me, and divorced when I was 2. And my mom remarried, my dad remarried. So I really didn't have a mentor. I could even say that I never really, as a kid growing up, had anybody that even threw a ball to me, because everybody was on the move and going. So everybody just thought, oh, hey, Rob's doing okay, right? So out on my own, and so I'm amazed I'm not in some prison cell somewhere, because I went off and was exploring as a kid at 13 and got into God knows what trouble. But when I was in that Rushoff garage, that single car garage, different folks would bring their cars in. And I do remember, and I haven't thought about this in a while, and you kind of piqued this memory. There was I'm always in someone's trunk, because that's where I was mounting the phone. And it was always interesting what you find in people's trunks. But this guy had this cassette series. What was his name? I think it was Michael Wickett. I need to look him up. But he was a motivational speaker. And the gentleman had a tape in his, it was a cassette tape at the time. He had it in his car. So I listened to this. You turn on the car and whatever's in there is playing. And so it piqued my interest, and I kept listening. And I mentioned it to him at the end, and he goes, I've had those tapes for a few months, listened to them 2 or 3 times. If you want to borrow them or even keep them, help yourself. So I did. And gosh, every day I was in a car installing, I was listening to these tapes, and that was foundational for me as well, in the sense that, hearing a motivational speaker talk, there's many similarities across the board that they have about big goals and writing down your goals and imagining things and so on. But through the years, I was in various sales trainings, Tom Hopkins and so on. And Zig Ziglar is probably my favorite for anyone listening. I would highly recommend Zig Ziglar. He was just an aw shucks kind of guy. And I tell my kids as well, if you're nice to folks, especially the janitor, those pay dividends, because you either get insight. I mean, you don't do it for expecting anything, right? That you just want to be a stand-up citizen. But at the end of the day, those people don't forget you either, and are glad that you engage them. And so I've always had that mentality. And I tell the kids too, I said, and a lot of times you get free shit from it too, right? You're just nice to somebody, you talk to the flight attendant. My wife and kids are always amazed all the free shit I get, because I'm just friendly, right? And they're like, hey, can I get you another drink? And this one's on us, right? And that happens all the time. But it's just being a nice individual too. But that's helped just in the other things I mentioned, getting, learning to get permits. You just ask people. There's no secret sauce there. In fact, I'll probably ask you how to do a podcast, because when I sunset, this sounds pretty intriguing to me. So perhaps I can get 1 or 2 people to listen to that in the future.
I would be happy to help you with that. So bringing it back to current day.
Mm-hmm. So current day, when I started the company, that was 10 years ago. It was 10 years ago this past April.
Well, happy 10-year anniversary.
Thank you. Thank you. So
and the company's name?
The company's name is WANRack. So I mentioned earlier, we build WANs, wide area networks. So the name WANRack, it's kind of tough to say. In hindsight, I probably would have named it something different. But at the time, you're looking for a 1-word name, something easy to remember, something that you can get a website name that's available, and brainstorm that forever, and had family and friends help. But the WAN is all capitalized, stands for wide area network, in the rack, because we're building these point to point or rack to rack. There's nothing in the middle to water it down. So that's how we came up with the name. And started out with the same playbook. Really, it was just hitting the rewind button from Unite. And we are further down the runway at this point in our life cycle than we were. Well, I should say when I left there, I was there for 7 years. At WANRack, we were as far as we were at Unite at 7, here at WANRack in 5 years. So very proud of that. And the same business model, and you plant those apple trees, and you get enough of those apple trees, you start connecting them together, and you have these nice networks. So we're in 23 states here. In 2018, we got approached by private equity, and they took a majority control of us. And then during the pandemic, we were planning on being with them, probably typical PE hold time is 3 to 7 years. And we had planned on being with them at least that full 7 years. We were doing some great things. And when the pandemic hit, you know, everyone knows that story, and how everyone was at home and needed broadband, right? And so these infrastructure funds, I don't know how much, keep me from digressing too much here, but in the funding world, if you're going to get funding, you know, there's the traditional bank on a debt basis, but on an equity basis, you have your friends and family, right? You have yourself, then friends and family, and then angel investors. From angel, you go to venture, and from venture, you go to PE. PE has all levels. It could be, you know, a few $100,000 to $1 million, and then $1 million to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 50, and so on up to billions. And so, and then certain ones have focused investments in certain industries. So, and after that, the promised land is infrastructure funding, and they're kind of a long hold. And if you can get there, you've got very deep pockets and a different philosophy or mindset, if you will. You can think more long-term instead of dressing up the shop, if you will. So the PE firm that had us when COVID hit, we were thinking, you know, this is blowing up our business. Everybody loves it. There's probably no better time in human history than to maybe shop this for a recapitalization. And we knew infrastructure funds were sniffing around the fiber industry, because if you think of their investments, they own highways and toll bridges and power plants and so on. And these are investments that can withstand massive shocks to the economy, right? And they never blip. Well, COVID hit, nobody was going through toll bridges. So they're like, wow, we really need to diversify here a little better than we thought. And so it turned into an auction process, and we sold again, just closed a year ago, call it 13 months ago, with CBRE, which is the second largest infrastructure fund in the world. They're based out of London. In fact, I think they're 2 years older than our country. So they're a very steady Eddie company, and they've got deep pockets. And so we are with an infrastructure fund now, and doing very well, and doing more fiber to the home here in the near future, which is what everybody needs, right? So there's a lot of stimulus funds that got passed, the infrastructure bill that's going to help folks get connected. And so it's been, looking back, incredibly stressful. I've got a couple of buddies that say, wow, man, you're so lucky. And I'm like, are you serious? You've known me for how long? You think, you know, you saw me when I was going to work early and coming home late, and never, you know, bringing my daughter and my second daughter bears home from different states, because I was traveling nonstop and feeling guilty, and all of the gray hairs that I got, and the stress, and years shaved off my life. And I'm sure lucky. So that's what I say. It's lonely at the top as well.
Yeah. Wow. What a career. That is amazing.
So far, so good.
So far, so good.
Yeah. And I've got, along the way, I've done real estate, and I like to play in stocks as well, just for fun. And I'm truly a numbers guy at heart, which is where you started this conversation. Yeah. So I'll bring it full circle there. But yeah, I love numbers. I love finance. I couldn't tell you much about other businesses, but for some reason, numbers click with me.
I will have to say, our listeners know that Ashley and I dabble in the stock market as well. Are you willing to give us a little insight into what you like to do with the stock market?
Sure. I will tell you, my history in the stock market is a little bit like learning how to play craps. And I lost a lot of money learning what I know today. Let's put it that way.
Okay, so You've run the course like most of us have.
Yes, yes. And so the early 2000s really, in fact, I would argue the early 2000s got me into real estate because I had an IRA. It was a 401k that got transferred over. I had about 30,000 into that. The dot-com bust knocked it down, oh gosh, to 3,000, I want to say, because I lost about 90%, went back up to about 16, back down to 1,000. It was brutal, and went back up to 8. And I said, I don't have any gains here, so I certainly won't be taking a tax loss by cashing this in. And my first daughter, in fact, I think the common denominator in this podcast seems to be my daughter, doesn't it? But she started going to kindergarten, and we wanted to send her to private school. And so again, part of the hustle, how can I have a side gig or, to help this situation out? And that was about $200 a month. And so we bought a rental property, and it's actually called a contract for deed. And that's a whole nother podcast. I'll be happy to do with you. But it's kind of like a lease to own. And we focused on a Hispanic area of Kansas City because we were introduced by one. And this first property, I liquidated that 401k, which was an IRA, for 8,000. That was my down payment on this first house. About threw up on the way to closing. I'm like, what am I doing with my life, right? And hope the place doesn't burn down. And anyway, my goal was $200 positive cash flow, and damned if I didn't get exactly that. I think I got 180, and then I charged an extra 20 for something. So I was at 200. And then from there, they kept introducing friends. And gosh, I have a pretty sizable real estate portfolio today. But in that gave me the money to start paying for private school for my first daughter. And now it's just grown from there. I always call it the snowball, right? At first it's just a couple of flakes of snow, but once it gets to be a big snowball rolling downhill, it's a nice cash flow operation. But so stocks early on were not good to me, but it certainly, you look back on your life and you see these things that were difficult times, but they turned in. There was always a silver lining, right? And so that was my silver lining to losing basically my butt on stocks initially. But I've read a lot of books. I love reading nonfiction biographies, but a lot of stock books as well. And I've got kind of two mentalities. I like value investing. I like to see, what I would say probably the godfather of that is Buffett. So I like to see inefficiencies. If you've got a great name that's got a good moat around it and it's been beaten up, jump on board. And it might take a little longer. But I also like I also like technicals. Cups with handles, Head and Shoulders, and momentum. You can't really argue against going with the herd. It'll either stomp you if you're on the wrong side of it. But if you see a trend, you can see a lot of volume in these big institutions that get behind something or a trend, or, right now you're kind of seeing that migration from growth when interest rates get high and so on. So you certainly want to have that in the back of your mind and go with the herd. And then if you have some of those other fundamentals that you've learned over the years, I think you need to take them all into your full portfolio of understanding and knowledge. But the goal is just to have more winners than losers, right? Buy low, sell high.
Exactly. One last question for you. We have listeners from around the globe. We have Belgian listeners. We have Cameroon listeners, United Kingdom. Does your business go global?
It can, but does not. So we're domestic only. But I would tell you, all of those places you named, they all need fiber. In fact, I would argue some of the areas of the world, let me just give you an example. Say some of the African nations or Central America, they are, in some instances, leapfrogging America in terms of infrastructure, fiber related infrastructure specifically, because if you think about it, they haven't had any technology up until cell phones, and cell phones, as I mentioned, 98% of that network is a fiber-based system. So, you always hear stats on like South Korea. They're the most wired wired country in the world. Well, the reason for that, the geographic area is so small. It's very dense. So that's not hard to do. America is so spread out and very rural, a lot of mountains. You need to hit the farmer 4 miles down the road from where your fiber stopped, and that's very expensive for one customer. So there's parts of the world that when they are upgrading to broadband, I wouldn't even say upgrading to broadband. When broadband came out, they didn't have anything before then. So instead of starting with copper wiring, they just jumped right to fiber. So there is a huge opportunity for folks that might see a company. I'd say do your research, but whatever you name the company in the world, if they're building fiber and it's a company other than the main incumbent, that'd be an interesting investment. And it's just great to see how much fiber and broadband and access to information, right? It's we can go into politics and everything else, but just having access to information and doing that at light speed, which is a fiber-based network, and it's the most economical way to go today. No reason why any place on the planet can't have that or some wireless-based system. And if you're in a remote country, there's a little bit of fiber, but then there's wireless from there. It's a great time to be in the business.
Well, I can't thank you enough for your time today. It was great getting to know your business and everything around your business. And I thank you very much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me. And I don't know if I taught anybody anything, but happy to share my story. Thank you.
I think you've shared lots of information. So greatly appreciate it.
Well, happy birthday to you again. Hopefully your husband will spoil the heck out of you today. And
just today,
many more
every
to
day,
come.
every day.
That's great.
And to all of our listeners, stay awesome and keep reaching for your anything.